All right. Welcome back to the Wrench Factor podcast, the show that gives you an inside look at what really drives modern manufacturing and maintenance. I'm your host, Nick Haase, the co-founder of MaintainX. Today, we'll be talking about a problem sitting underneath almost every AI conversation in manufacturing, the missing shared language between equipment, software, data, and people. Everyone wants to use AI to improve operations, reduce downtime, and make smarter decisions. But AI needs context. It needs to understand what a machine is, what the data means, how events are related, and whether the information it's reasoning on can be trusted. That's why I'm excited to welcome Ryan Kelly from AMT and IMTS to the show today. Ryan works at the center of manufacturing technology adoption, interoperability, and standards, including MTConnect. He has a great perspective on why the next wave of industrial AI depends less on buzzwords and more on whether our systems can actually understand each other. So Ryan, welcome to the Wrench Factor.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks for the great intro. You kind of laid it all out.
Yeah. So Ryan, for listeners who may or may not know you or AMT or IMTS, can you give us a quick overview of those organizations and your role and what kind of problems are your team, working on right now?
Yeah, happy to. So yeah, my name is Ryan Kelly. I'm the Vice President of Technology at AMT. AMT stands for the Association for Manufacturing Technology. We're a 124-year-old trade association. Our members make stuff that manufacturers use. So that would be, maybe Mazak CNC machines, Fanuc robots, Autodesk with their CAD software, EOS 3D printers, that kind of stuff. But it doesn't include like a Boeing or a Caterpillar, sort of the end users of those products. We really do two things. We do market access and industry intelligence. Probably the thing we're most well known for, which you already mentioned, is the IMTS trade show, the International Manufacturing Technology Show.
Big deal.
Yeah, it is a big deal, and it's going to be happening in just several weeks, right? In September 14th through 19th. We always hosted in Chicago, and it only happens every 2 years, so it is a big deal. Certainly, more and more of my attention, my team's attention is really focused on that right now. We expect, I think we did it in 2024, and we had about 90,000 people come, around 2,000 exhibitors. So yeah, it's really where the manufacturing industry goes to learn about the latest technologies and tool up. So we're really super excited about that right now.
I love it. And you've got such an incredibly interesting is you're not just seeing, one plant or one vendor and one implementation. You're getting to see patterns across the industry, and it's really exciting macro view. And every executive that I speak to right now is hearing some version of we need to do more AI or we need to do AI. From your perspective, what's the infrastructure problem underneath that request that most people are missing?
Yeah, and in fact, I'd like to get your perspective on this as well, because I think that you're really talking to, in some sense, the same people, but like a really specific, people that are really focused on operations. Where a lot of my conversations are, with the people that are developing the technology.
Sure.
Tying it back to IMTS, I mean, we're joking that this year it's going to be AI MTS,
Yeah.
because of I mean, honestly, there's been some, form of AI at IMTS the last several show cycles, and it's just increasing in significance. But it really seems like this time, almost every exhibitor is bringing something related to AI. We have a dedicated AI conference for the first time. We have a dedicated AI arena featuring companies that are new to IMTS that are just, talking about AI. We've got the hyperscalers. We've got Google, AWS, and Microsoft. They're really going to be talking about industrial AI.
Yeah.
And then, of course, so many of the tools, ERP systems, CAD softwares, MES systems that customers are already using, they're seeing new, buttons appear that sort of have AI. And so there's a lot of activity, and I think that there's a lot of noise. And I think someone like you and your colleagues, you're really on the bleeding edge of this, of really trying to bring more value to your customers using AI. You're probably using AI internally to increase efficiencies and things like that. And I'd say a lot of my recent work has been trying to figure out ways to explain this and develop frameworks and things so that we can know, exactly what we're talking about when we're talking about AI in these industrial settings. And that being one way to home in on specific problems or challenges that we need to address as an industry if we want to, as a whole industry, reap the benefits of AI. And certainly our work as association fits right into that because we're a nonprofit. We're a mission-based organization. The things that we do are for the betterment of the whole industry. And certainly the standard that we've been developing for, I think, 19 years now, MTConnect, really slots into that nicely. Is a good example of that. It's something that our convening power as a trade group, we're able to bring the right people together to set that up in the first place. But it's pretty interesting that, MTConnect has really been known as really just a telemetry standard. How do you get data off of the machines? And it's sort of speaking the same language. Because of its utility as a way to give real and precise information to AI, we're seeing a huge resurgence of interest in MTConnect these days. And that's, I think, part of the conversation that we're having today is like, how does that fit in?
Exactly. I see this all the time with customers. They want machines that talk to their systems, but once you start asking how their equipment's networked, what data is available, and what that data actually means, the conversation gets more complicated quickly. And so, I know you're really passionate about at MTConnect, and I want to kind of make sure for folks who maybe aren't as familiar that are listening, can you talk about it? When you talk about MTConnect as like a shared vocabulary or semantic framework, what is that sort of plain English? Like, what's the way for anyone to understand what that's?
Well, I'll start for people that maybe have never heard of MTConnect, or people that, like I said, associate it with just a way to get data off CNC machines primarily. So it is a maybe a data dictionary or something. What we're trying to do is with the machines that speak MTConnect or that have an adapter to MTConnect, just means that all of the data that is streaming off of the equipment uses the same terminology, the same data structure, so that downstream systems can interpret it all in the same way.
Regardless,
right? So it's
regardless of the system, it's a standardized layer.
That's right. It's a software layer. It's not a hardware piece, but sometimes the really simple levels like HDMI. If your DVD player, I mean, God, no one has those things anymore, right? But like if all your sort of different AV equipment use different plugs, it would be really hard to make all that stuff work together. And that, I think, at a really simplistic level is what we're trying to do with MTConnect. These things just all kind of fit together. They speak the same language. What the data means. Horsepower is the same across brands, or the spindle is turning is like the same across brands. But where we go beyond that and where it becomes useful for AI is over the last decade, we've been moving it from just your standard, which is like a PDF with instructions of this is how you should refer to things. And it's then really up to the end user to determine whether or not they're following the standard correctly. We have moved to a model-based standard and implemented it using a language called SysML. And what that means is the standard is written in software, and then it has a lot of the logic, the relationships, the definitions of all of these elements in a way that software can interpret and understand. And that makes it really useful, downstream for systems that, great, you've got a standardized definition, but now we've actually imbued those definitions with meanings and the relationship to other terms in the standard. Another thing that makes it really useful is you can use software to determine whether or not you've actually implemented the standard correctly. A challenge that we've seen in the last years is maybe a customer buys a MTConnect enabled machine, but are they sure that the language that this machine is speaking is MTConnect?
Right.
Uh, and as you know, for your business, you don't want to make any guesses in these industrial operations. You want to be 100% sure that the data that you're getting is correct, because you want to rule that out as a variable when you're doing some troubleshooting. And so that's one other important characteristic of the way that MTConnect is architected, is once you implement it, then you can use software to validate the fact that, okay, yes, this is MTConnect. Everything is sounding and looking the way that it should. And that's not something that most standards can do. And actually, a lot of folks in the standards community are looking at what we've done here and using kind of using that as a jumping off point for where they might architect their standards in the future as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really fascinating evolution to just say, we went from, can we get the data, to now, can I trust that the system knows what the data represents? Can I validate that? And that's where it's and then bringing it into this ML layer here, where that's where I think the economic side gets interesting too, because something that may be beyond some of our audience today, but I'm hearing more CIOs talk about things like token optimization, the cost of AI at scale. If you're having AI do all of this extra compute to recalibrate, or configure some of that data set, it starts to cost a lot more. And so if every system uses different labels for the same thing, AI's got to spend more effort figuring out whether those things are actually the same. And so it's a really thing where you guys are tackling.
And that's assuming that it would come up with the right answer, given that kind of ambiguous context in the first place. And I see this as, like, I'm hearing about it more, you're hearing about it more, but I think that this, what we call the semantic layer, is gonna, you're gonna hear more about it in the months ahead.
Yeah.
The AI industry seems like it has really caught the physical AI bug. This is something that you're, hearing more about, and
we'll see a lot of physical AI at IMTS.
The whole thing is physical AI, and so I think in some sense they're late to the party, but there's this real challenge when it comes to taking the benefits of AI that we've seen when it's really just working in the realm of data, language, coding, and where there's a lot of training data, to the kind of very different world of industry, and where they hope that physical AI can be beneficial. It's not that there's a shortage of data. There's an abundance of data.
Sure.
The problem is that data it's really hard, especially for an AI system, to interpret what that is. Like, I imagine when you go and do a new implementation, kind of step one is like, all right, let's look at the data that you have and let's try to make sense of it. Is that right?
Yep. It's always
and how long does that process take usually, or sort of what goes into that effort, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is really an exercise in understanding sort of what is it the client's looking to get out of that data. How are they, how confident are they in the current, version and quality of that data, versus, sometimes the best thing we get out of it is simply like a hierarchy of how the assets are laid out, and the labeling of those assets, and the history beyond that is sometimes too much of a tangled ball of yarn to bother pulling that. It could pull you in a lot of wrong directions, right? Now, occasionally you come into some places that are a little more structured and ready to kind of move along that curve, but it's very much a case by case basis, and something that our team is really good at helping kind of assess, diagnose, and to be clear, we can work a little bit of magic on cleaning it up as well. But that's still there's
what I'm hearing, though, is because this is such a pervasive, I don't want to call it a challenge, right? It's just like, that's the reality. And that's the reality for all of the companies, is they've got tons of data
of companies. Yeah.
But before you can do anything with it, you kind of got to do what you described. You need to you need to sort of assess what it is that we have, kind of the high signal, high quality
Yeah.
data from the low quality, maybe low signal data. And so, and I would say that like the companies that are looking at you, they're maybe even a little bit ahead on the technology curves, and maybe the
It very much depends on the sophistication of their organization and the leadership across the team. Some of them have more sophisticated IT leadership or controls engineering, folks that are on top of that. Others are still learning about that and kind of trying to figure out how they can catch up. But one thing that I'm curious to get your point of view here is like a lot of leaders hear data and data interoperability and think like that's an engineering or an IT issue. So
Mhm.
why should a plant manager or a VP of operations or even like a reliability leader care? Like where does this why is this
uh
they should be aware of?
yeah, really interesting question. So I think it relates to this level of, that's not engineering's data, that's not manufacturing's data, that's the organization's data.
Mm,
And if you think about how these sorts of businesses want to leverage AI, you want the AI to have access to all of the data
yeah,
so that it can find those connections.
right.
If a leader would not make this, interoperability or making that data accessible and legible, to AI agents, they're really limiting the context that that AI agent would have to be able to answer questions that are either directly related to the operations,
Hmm.
or maybe just tangentially related, but that would still be a really important part of the puzzle.
Yeah.
And so,
Or
what
scale
we
a successful pilot or something, right? If they've got something that is working and they want to scale it, but they haven't factored that in, that makes it tough.
yeah, precisely.
Yeah.
And that's where again, like we're seeing a renewed interest in MTConnect because of our approach to that, which
Hmm.
is essentially, and this is where I'm always, and we're going to work through here, trying to find easier ways to explain this, because when we say something like the semantic layer, not a lot of people know
Yeah.
what we say, and also when we're using frameworks like ontology, which is like a philosophical or a computer science term, people
Hmm.
don't know what we're talking about. But I think that the principles are quite simple. One way to think about it is, formally, like something like MTConnect was like a dictionary. It was full of terms and had a definition of the terms, and our emphasis on providing the semantics is like the grammar. Like you
Right.
can't speak English if you don't have both sort of like the words, and then the grammar is sort of like how those words need to be constructed in order to form intelligible
Yeah.
sentences. And that's what we provide with the semantics that are embedded into MT Connect. Things like spindle speed, um, are defined, and what that means is sort of hard coded into MTConnect. That
Yeah.
becomes useful for um, an AI agent, because if you ask a question about some data that came through using MTConnect, all of these terms like spindle speed or horsepower or the position of certain axes are um, known to the agent. Then it can reason about it because it understands all of these terms and how they relate together. And then the values are then sort of now in context.
Right. And I think that's kind of like the part where I think a lot of executives need to try to understand is if you can't reuse that architecture, you can't take those spindle speed, you can't take all that and you reuse that across all of your sites. You can't amortize that investment. And if the
Hmm.
pilot works, the pilot may work, but your business case breaks when every new location becomes a custom project that needs to be done. And so how much of the challenge with like deploying MT Connect to world or standardizing in general, do you think is technical versus organizational?
Yeah, or like cultural.
Cultural, right?
Um, I don't. I think at this point, look, there's certainly real technical challenges, but
Yeah.
those can be addressed. I think that it's largely um, a people challenge.
Hmm.
To your point, that this isn't just an ops thing. or this isn't just a factory floor thing. This is something that is really important at the organizational level and needs to be thought of as a top-down data interoperability initiative.
Yeah.
And I think that there's also an education thing. Certainly with MTConnect, I think if folks have heard about it at all, they think about it as just a protocol for just getting data off of the machines. I don't think that they understand the value of the ontological framework that exists. All those meanings and definitions that have been developed through the open source community and over many years. That's really valuable. Those are decisions that you don't have to make when it goes to looking at tables of data and saying, well, what does all this stuff mean? What definition do we want to use for this term? Like that's a real part of the work right now that doesn't need to be done if you adopt MTConnect, which is free and open source.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm gonna put it on the people and not so much on the technical side.
I would agree. I think like so much of the technical part is solvable. It's solved. It's been solved. But when teams are spinning up separate projects and spreading resources, then end up with like 5 things that do the same job, 4 of which don't talk to each other. You kind of end up in this bottleneck situation. And for the executives or operational leaders that are listening, maybe on their drive to work or something, what questions do you think they should be asking before approving their next AI or connected factory initiative that they're looking at?
So I think, you brought up the term interoperability.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a good starting point. I think that ironically, there seems like there's 2 sets of assumptions here. One is that interoperability is possible and things just plug together and they work. From someone that is a sponsor of a standards organization, we want the world to go that way. But it's not as plug and play as we would like. This sort of thing takes time and takes participation. People can certainly get more involved with the MTConnect Institute or some of the other standards bodies if they're passionate about it, because it really does take these sorts of individuals to move the situation forward. But there's the other assumption that interoperability just doesn't work. It's impossible. It's always a nightmare scenario, and so we might not even try. But I think that the stakes are too high right now. And so I would encourage any operations leaders that are now being pulled into more conversations about data or how we're going to implement and get benefit out of AI. The AI is not going to be able to bring a lot of value if it doesn't have high quality data, and importantly, the context surrounding that data for it to be useful. And then I would be really looking then at how much of a priority is interoperability, and are we putting the right pressure on our vendors, to be able to provide us the data in formats that we like, or work seamlessly with some of our other systems, because it's only through that we're going to be able to give these tools the rich data and importantly the context surrounding that data, where it can really drive some game-changing results for us. Without it, here's the thing: you can throw anything at these tools and they will do something with it. They will give you a response back, and sometimes they'll be very, very confident with the answer that they're giving you. And so it's really our responsibility to make sure that the data that's going into it is really grounded in meaning and it's accurate.
Yeah, I think of like an analog for it. The way that I think operational leaders should think about it, sort of to piggyback on that, is like the way that they think and care about cybersecurity, right? They don't need to become experts in it, but they know that it's important and it's going to come up with IT, and they're going to need to check that box at some point. Does it have the right cybersecurity layers? There are people internally in your organization that likely have some level of expertise in that, or at least some idea And as long as they keep interoperability in sort of a similar mindset, in that same sort of standard of saying, does it hold interoperability? Does every app like leader need to be an expert in it? Not necessarily, at least not into the weeds, but if they're asking those questions the same way they would about cybersecurity and consider interoperability, I think it's going to help accomplish a lot of those things and help them ask smarter questions. But
yeah, I
when
think
you look
those
across,
really good points.
when you look across the industry right now, like what are the signs that you see, manufacturers or even vendors, partners that, are approaching things the right way? What does good look like to you?
So I, I think there's a couple things driving this, but I think one of the biggest ones is, the labor shortage and the fact that manufacturers in the U.S. they're busy, but they're
Yeah.
having to do more with less.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of manufacturers or executives within manufacturing companies, they are getting a glimpse through using tools like ChatGPT or Claude, and they're seeing how high leverage they can be in the kind of more knowledge work side of the business. And I think that they are very intrigued at the potential that these sort of tools can bring to the more operational side of the business. But I would say I go to a lot of conferences. I
Yeah.
have a lot of meetings with both the technology companies and the end users, and this topic comes up every single time. And usually when it does, we're talking about it for 30, 45 minutes, maybe even longer. And it's clear that there's a lot of people want to compare notes. What are
Yeah.
you doing? Are you doing something that I'm not doing?
Yep.
And so, things are moving quickly. I do think that there's a lot of interest in, but I don't think that there's a really clear roadmap for small and medium-sized companies in particular to implement, physical AI.
Right. And
Certainly, if they're
now it's becoming more accessible to them if they can given that sort of path, right?
working with a company like yours, for example, is going to give them that a bit of a framework and a bit of a roadmap because the things that they've got to do to have a successful MaintainX implementation, that's work done. That's going to be, oh, well, now I can maybe,
Okay.
add another tool to the stack that can take advantage of all this, data cleaning and,
Yeah.
getting my data in order. So, I would say that right now, what I'm hearing both from the technology companies and the industry itself is like there is strong interest. There is a lot of enthusiasm and curiosity. Um, and now I think is the time where we're gonna, really start seeing the impact of the companies that have been aggressive and are looking to, not just pilot this, but really, move from pilot into production. And I think after that, uh, the 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 companies that are going full bore into this,
Hmm.
they're gonna be performing better, and I think it's gonna increase the competition a lot, and so that, a lot of companies are gonna need to, follow suit if they wanna stay in the game.
Completely agree. I think it's a massive competitive advantage, and in fact, I think it's a sustainability requirement. I don't think you can be, and it's sustainable in the sense that will your business be around, um, and be able to offer a competitive product or at a competitive rate. But before we close out here, just looking ahead, all the attention around AI automation, manufacturing technology adoption with IMTS. What are you most excited about? What's any
At
prediction
IMTS?
in IMTS and beyond?
Oh, beyond, yeah, beyond that?
What do you
Well,
think?
I mean, so look, I mean, with IMTS coming up, I mean, that is really, I think it's like 1.3 million square feet right now of, all these companies that are bringing the latest in manufacturing technology.
Yeah,
Um, it's always fun to just walk around and get your mind blown. Um, the automation sector is like probably the fastest growing segment. So there's a lot of amazing um, not just robots, but sort of vision systems and software systems that make it so it's easier to um, implement robotics, especially for small and medium-sized companies.
yeah,
Um, in addition to, all the metalworking and additive manufacturing systems that you can see. Also the software side, which takes up like the whole east building, is
Yeah.
just amazing. And that's a good place to see, the smart vendors that are bringing completely, new solutions to the market that would not have existed the last IMTS, because that's just how fast things are happening in the AI space. But in general, I think, the thing that I'm most excited about is that these are a lot of things on the software side can be implemented without an enormous cost that a big capital equipment expenditure would be, right?
Right.
Any company can take advantage of it if they've got if they're using computers and collecting data at all. And everybody's got it, whether it's in your email or whether it's in your MES system or somewhere else. I think it's really, we're just sort of limited by our imaginations at this point of
Mhm.
what are the things that we can think to do with it. And going to IMTS, it's a great opportunity to kind of have your horizons expanded a little bit, and you can go home and think about, okay, what am I going to do? What's the first experiment I'm going to take, using this stuff?
Love it. Well, Ryan, this was a great conversation. I think the big takeaway here is to help, for folks to start really thinking about interoperability and understanding how to make sure you trust the data that's coming into your system so that you can build that foundation that you need to take advantage of all the exciting, AI that's coming. I love that you had the opportunity to share how, MTConnect is sort of continuing to make that easier for
Mhm.
folks with these self validations, and giving folks a lot to think about going into it. So huge thank you for joining us. For everyone
Yeah,
watching,
thanks for having me.
yeah, of course. And for everyone watching, please make sure to follow Ryan on LinkedIn. Follow AMT on. We'll put the links below the show notes here. And thank you again so much for joining us, folks. The
Well,
Wrench.
thanks for having me, Nick, and I look forward to seeing you in September in Chicago.
Yes, sir. I'll see you there. I'll be there. For everyone else, the Wrench Factor is live every other week. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and we'll see you next time. Thanks again, Ryan.
Bye.